reading from Esther chapter 7, verses 1 through 6 and 9 through 10, and chapter 9, verse 20 through 22. So the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther. On the second day, as they were drinking wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have won your favor, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me. That is my petition. And the lives of my people. That is my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had only been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have held my peace. But no enemy can compensate for this damage to the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he who has presumed to do this?" Esther said, "A foe and enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "Look, the very gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose words saved the king, stands at Haman's house, 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Hang him on that." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the anger of the king abated. Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, enjoining them that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar and also the 15th day of the same month, year by year, as the days on which the Jews gained relief from their enemies, and as the month that had been turned for them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts of food to one another and presents to the poor. I have been blessed to work on many an overseas mission team, and the predicaments that can occur while attempting to do ministry in unfamiliar surroundings with new cultures and language barriers are multitude. However, I often found that it was the very conundrums which ended up becoming the teachable moments for myself, for my team, or for my newfound local friends in ministry. It is in the places of our shortcomings that we can see where God is at work, weaving a tapestry of coincidences that end up not being coincidences in the background. For example, once while I was working in the desert places of Peru, one of the poorest communities that I've ever witnessed, located hours and hours drive from what could be called the nearest village, we were tasked with the job of leading a vacation Bible school for the children. The entire population of this particular slum appeared to be children when we arrived. Much like a college town is deserted during the summer months when school is out, the daytime demographic of this slum became whoever was too young to take the bus into the city to find work, with the exception of a few nursing mothers who were left behind to tend to them en masse. After several hours' ride on this dusty road in a rickety old bus, we arrived to find the entire community of young patrons waiting eagerly for our scheduled activities and games. They were especially excited because our VBS came with snack time, with fortified milk and bread that we were going to hand out as part of the program. Somewhere in the confusion of setting up, my team realized that we had left all of our supplies on the bus that had left us there. We were devastated. I started to quickly devise a plan to do all of our games and programming without supplies, pulling on all of my years of doing low-budget and no-budget children's ministry in various churches across Texas. But, to all of our surprise, at that very moment, we saw the bus driver come walking back up the road towards us. And I thought to myself, praise God, he realized that we left our stuff on the bus and he came back to bring it to us. No, he didn't. He could have cared less if we had. He did, however, have a flat tire and needed our team's help to repair it as it was more than a one-person job. So we were able to get our supplies back and have an incredible VBS, and the driver was able to use our team's labor to help get him back on the road. Even after our supplies were safely back in our possession, we realized that we had another problem. We had vastly underestimated the number of children that we would be serving that day. We were not going to have enough milk and bread to serve everybody. And it wasn't like we could run to the local corner store and get more. We were in the middle of the desert. There was nothing. I was devastated. How was I going to be able to turn away these hungry kids? What were we going to do? So my team began to pray for God's intervention and guidance. Miraculously, through God's divine providence, somehow every child and nursing mother was served bread and milk that day. There was even enough milk that everybody got to have seconds. It was definitely a loaves and fishes moment because there's no other way that miracle could have occurred. God's hand was at work in the background, even when we didn't know what we were going to do or where we were going to turn for help. When we fell short, God had it covered. All we had to do was walk in faith and take the next steps that God had called us to do. God took care of the rest. I am reminded oftentimes in ministry that God's kingdom building work doesn't just happen in this world because of us, but in spite of us. Despite our best efforts, so often we are going to fall short. And unless God is guiding our steps, our own plans will oftentimes fail. Like Psalm 127 says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain." The story of Esther is one where we see God at work throughout, even though God is never mentioned by name in the book of Esther. We can see God's providence through a series of coincidences that are not coincidences. For example, Esther becomes queen at the perfect time. Famously, Mordecai, her cousin and adoptive paternal figure, often we call him uncle, reminds her that even though God's will is going to be done regardless of Esther's actions, perhaps she was appointed to her station for such a time as this. Mordecai uncovers a plot to assassinate the king, granting him favor in the king's eyes. The king just happens to have a sleepless night where he just happens upon the written account of Mordecai intervening and saving him. And then Mordecai just happens to be the scribe that overhears the plot to destroy all of the Jews. Esther bravely walks in faith to go before the king, who just happens to lower his scepter to allow her audience. When Haman's plot is eventually overturned, it is Mordecai's loyalty that Esther uses to remind the king just whose side he should be on when it comes to God's people. And, in an ultimate twist of irony, Haman is led away to the very gallows that he himself had built for Mordecai. These coincidences in Esther's story can be interpreted as markers of divine providence, illustrating that events which appear to be random are actually a part of God's larger, more purposeful plan. This perspective invites us all to consider how faith and action can intertwine in times of crisis, how God's plans and our own human agency in deciding to go along with those plans can ultimately lead to a bigger picture of salvation and justice in the world. The story of Esther teaches us that even when circumstances appear to be dire, that faith and courage can bring about profound change. Purim is a celebration of this divine intervention, reminding us even today that there is often a hidden hand guiding our lives, and that our actions, no matter how small, can have significant impacts on the world around us. This holiday encourages us to embrace our roles within our communities and to trust in the larger plan at work, celebrating the miracles that unfold in our lives. Purim celebrates that God is always at work on behalf of God's people, even when we cannot see it.